Hi, I'm Janet Deneve, founder and director of the Ubud Writers and Readers Festival. You are about to hear one of our highlight conversations recorded live for our 2022 festival, which explored the role of the written word in upholding humanity's values and freedoms through our festival theme, Mamayu Hayuning Bawana, Uniting Humanity. So please settle in and let the magic of our 19th festival continue.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our session today. We have three wonderful speakers here. Amazing woman that has made books on poetry, especially because our topic today is women powering poetry. I myself, I'm Sonia. I'm a writer as well and a teacher, lecturer in Ganesha University of Education in Singaraja, North Bali. Okay, before we start the session, I would like to introduce our speakers today one by one. The first one is Venilla Rajaguru in the middle. Venilla Rajaguru is a poet by nature, a scholar by training, and an entrepreneur by practice. Poetry comes naturally to her, and she happily revels in her metaphorical stylistics of verse, rhyme, and rhythm. Her first volume of poetry in English, Intimations, Poetry in the Light of the Mind's Eye, is popular and now translated into several foreign languages. Researching, her second volume of poetry is larger than the first and contains 101 poems on the theme of resurgence, spanning the sociological, philosophical, and metaphysical dimension of our human experience. Please welcome Venilla Rajaguru. Our second speaker is Bejan Matur. Good morning. Bejan Matur was born in the ancient Hittite city of Maras in 1968. She is a pioneering figure in contemporary poetry. Her poems were translated into 42 foreign languages and granted with numerous awards. She was hosted at countless conferences and festivals in many countries. She wrote articles and essays and published 11 books, 9 of which is poetry. Her music accompanied poetry was presented to a wide audience at prestigious stages like Royal Opera House, King Place London, and the Princeton University. In 2012, her book, How Abraham Abandoned Me, became the recommended translation for spring 2012 by the Poetry Book Society founded by the T.S. Eliot. Welcome, Bejan Matur. Okay. Last but not least, I have to find a note, sorry. Okay, Dr. Afra Atiq. Dr. Afra Atiq is an Emirati poet, scholar, and teaching artist. She holds a strong record of academic and professional excellence, having spent the last 10 years at the intersection of education and culture in various capacities. Okay, currently Dr. Afra is the Vice President of the Board of Directors of the newly established Emirates Reprographic Rights Management Association. She completed her PhD in Media and Creative Industry at UAE University. Her research focusing on mapping the Arab literary ecosystem and in particular the use of the parallel convergent research method. Additionally, she has been published in notable academic journals. She also earned a master's degree in diplomacy. Welcome, Dr. Atra. Yay.
Thank you.
So, to begin with, I would like to ask their perspective or point of view about women and poetry as our theme today. And I would like to hear how their perspective of poetry and women in the world of chaos nowadays, in chaotic world, and how words in their minds could somehow save or make a better world. So I would like to hear your perspective on our theme. Let me start with Venilla. your opinion about this. Yes.
Well, I mean, the title today about connecting words with life is so pertinent because it's about emotions. And women often get told that, oh, you're so emotional, as if it's a weakness. But I really think that it's the best thing that a woman carries within herself, and to be able to express that in words is the gift by itself. So I would say, emotions is something to be celebrated, and also very. It's at the very center of poetry. I was once asked in a writers' meet, "What is a poem?" And I said, in the simplest version, a poem is the most genuine expression of what the person intends to say. In its most grandest, it can be various things. It could be a rhetoric, it could be a sociological deliberation, it could be a philosophical exploration of an issue. But in its simplest version, it's an emotion. On that note, I'd like to share a simple poem. Mm-hmm. And it's called Tears. And and I wanted to write about tears because, this is about an abused woman. And at some point in time, we all women get to say, oh, you cry too much and cry baby and that sort of thing. But this emphasizes the power of tears and the rising or the resurgence of the woman over and above her tears. So I start. My daily tears back then were a playground for you. Abusing me were times of frolicking for you. You then reigned supreme in your dream of power. Not noticing, you steadily lost your power. Blind to your own reflection in my flow of tears, sluicing your blessings of love while mounting my fears. Till I escaped your walls to the realm of my muse, to love, write, and sing, soaring far from your abuse. Now I know I can no longer save you drowning. Not in my hurting tears, you drowning in my hurting tears that you loved once to see flowing. But in your own currents steadily you sink, your deep currents of rage devouring you, while I, purified, strong by my own purging tears, now live renewed and bold, well past my daunting fears, resurging with faith and passion for my new life, as an avid lover to create my new life.
Oh my God.
Thank you.
Thank you. So touching, yeah? Thank you. So, Bejan, you want to share your ideas about this topic? Thank you.
Thank you. It's a great pleasure
The
to
way you
be
can-
here.
Mm-hmm.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Poetry, to me, it's not a language. Although we use grammar and words, but it's beyond language.
Mm.
I can describe that, what is beyond, what is the mystery that we get through poetry. In general, through art, we get close to this mystery. Because we are all asking same questions and facing same truth that we are going to die. This is the main question in philosophy, in literature, in religions. We are all looking for this answer. Poetry is a channel to get close to this answer, to me, because it speaks of truth. What makes truth different than the reality, physical reality? Truth is not changeable. You cannot change truth. Everything can be changed. We are going to die. Earth is going to collapse one day, but truth will remain. And to get there, me as a poet, I use my intuitions. Usually I write when I walk, when I am in the nature, when I am in a harmony, feeling harmony with the nature around me. I walk, and I feel that there is a poem waiting for me, and I walk towards the poem. My breathe, the way I walk and breathe, I took the air into my body, and then it become a word, a line. Usually I do have my pen and notebook, and then I sit in a, I sit and write my poem. First, it comes as a music, as a rhythm. I feel like I'm in a vortex, a kind of sound vortex. It comes without words. It's just pure rhythm. And then, when I start writing, it becomes a line, poetic line. If I knew how to write music notes, I would compose a song. It's same thing. If I was a painter, I would feel a figure or a color that was not exist before. This is the creative process that I see. But also, I think poetry is not about our daily physical reality. The great poets that we call them, they don't describe what's going on, because tragedies are everywhere. We all have problems. We are all in pain. We all, as human, we face the difficulties. But the great poets, they are the one who comes with a solution, who are the one who tells something new to us, to console our souls. When I write, it's a kind of trance. I make the notes. I write by hand, of course. But this is the first part of the poem. But then I let them wait for a long time, sometimes a year, sometimes 2 years. I wanted to frozen my emotion there. I wanted to get distance between me and my first emotions. And then the second part is the making a poem part. I start working on the page I have, the lines, and then I start on this as a sculptor. I carve it, and I throw it away until the poem, the essence of the poem, stops me. There is a certain point I cannot go further. The poem knows its boundary. It doesn't let me to change it more. It's an entity. A poem is an entity. It cannot be changed because it is about the truth. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Wow, very emotional, right? Okay, Dr. Atra now.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here. It's my first time in Indonesia, so I'm very, very happy to be here.
Yeah.
I think I wish I was one of those poets that knew when they were going to be a poet and like knew that they were going to become a poet, and I wasn't. But there's always been words, and so I like to think that poetry chose me, that I didn't choose it, because it's always been there, and I just didn't know what it was going to be. And my earliest memory is, if you're older than 30, you'll know what I'm talking about. If you're younger than 30, you probably won't. But there was a time before we could Google, and everybody had to use dictionaries, and there were these Webster's dictionary every year would come out with this. Yeah. It was this big and blue. And my first memory is sitting on the floor of our house in the living room with this blue dictionary, and I think I'm only 2, maybe 3. It's a very, very early memory, and I remember looking at this, and it was all text. It was black and white, but there were a couple of pages colored pages in the middle with pictures, and I remember trying to get to those pages and like flipping through this book, and not knowing what it was, but looking at these words and knowing that there was something about these words, knowing that there was that these words were going to mean something, that my words were going to mean something. So I think that was the beginning, and I think that's something that's always been there. I never, I didn't have a moment where I feel like I fell in love with poetry in the same way that you fall in love with a person. I think it was a gradual love, and it was a sense of appreciation and sense of wanting to preserve moments and stories and figuring out how to do that. I remember when my grandfather passed years and years and years ago. When they told me he died, the literal first thought I had, I was 20-something, and the first thought I had was, but what about all of the stories that I haven't heard? And what about all the stories that he didn't get to tell? And what about all of the stories that I need to tell? And what are the stories that I need to tell for him? And so I wrote a poem called Bint al-Nukhada, which is a poem about him and his life. And I feel like going through that process of writing that poem that I completed years after his death was really the only way that I could like connect with that grief and work through that grief. So the poetry does amazing things in that respect. It tells the story and it preserves that moment, but it also gets you through things.
Yes.
And I think that poetry is extraordinary in that way. I'm a poet, I'm biased, but I don't really think there's other forms that really give you that kind of connection. And I don't know where the next poem is coming from or where the next poem is taking me, but I know that my words, mean something, that everybody's words mean something, and there has to be an extraordinary amount of value to something that once it's out there, it's out there. And I think, people ask me, when is your book coming out and how do you have, and I feel like I'm the only poet at these festivals that doesn't have a book. But truthfully, it is scary. It is one of the scariest things for me to think about that somebody's going to be alone with my words, and they're going to affect them in a certain way. And so I think of poetry also as a responsibility to tell those stories.
Amazing. Give applause. Okay. So, when we heard just now from the 3 speakers, they have a little bit the same point of view, that words are meaningful and to some level healing and make us better human being in some senses. Like Bejan, for example, she said that poetry is not a language. It is beyond language. I think this is a beautiful quote that I can take from Bejan. And from Venilla, we learned that poetry is feeling, emotion. And from Atra, we learned that poetry can heal, can connect her to the loved one. Okay, maybe you have something in your mind already, yeah? But hold on. I would like to ask them their creative process. We have heard a little bit from Bejan about her creative process, that it takes maybe a year or 2 years to, to process with the poetry. When the poetry comes, she wrote it, but then left them for 1 or 2 years and then rewrite again. Maybe you can also add later. Venilla and Atra, you can also share your experience about the specific process in creating poetry. Venilla, you can go first, yes.
I write a poem every single day, at least 1 poem every day. And I think in terms of metaphors or symbol. So, I just in a while, I'm going to share something that, when I went on a walk and I just felt compelled to write something about a lone trail. So it's the meeting of words with ideas and a philosophical expression. I have an analytical mind. being trained in research disciplines. So when when an idea strikes me, I get very I analyze. I tend to rationalize, and then but don't stop at that. And because it strikes me as a metaphor or some sign in either the kitchen or either in financial trading or whether it will be a maritime issue, which is my research area, or a space. Yesterday I was reciting on space constellation and cybersecurity. So it's an idea that I tend to explore. So this is about a lone trail, and this is how it goes. In this time of my lone walk, so peaceful soon after sunrise, with birds onward to the sky, their songs for free flight on the rise, I understand the ancestral spirits of mine on the rise. My great-grandma lived lone for decades, telling her old age bliss. My grandma extolled the virtue of her solitary bliss. My mother lectured on blissful solitude, not to be missed. But I had sought far and hard to find lovers, to find true love, chasing others at times with much fury and longing for love, falling again and again to see anyone as true love. Not until now, in this lone time of walking after sunrise, did I see that celestial spirit in me on the rise, tranquil and at home in this temple. My love for me did rise, past the follies of my early years and of my younger self, now matured with age after years and years of floundering self. I rejoice lone, steady in the loving spirit of myself. In the wise abandonment of the chase, there's my energy, the happy start of resurging self, rising in energy, joyous spirit in love, like a bird to the sky, now am I. I'm happily married, by the way, but, but this is also connected to my, the way that I write poetry, because when you write poetry, when you're asking about the creative process, you have to let go of all the pressures of what's coming up from in all directions, and just sit with the idea and the words flow, and then you shape it accordingly. It flows sometimes I have to consciously shape it. Sometimes it's just done in 5 seconds, or a short poem in 5 seconds, or I type. I don't write by hand, so I'm on my keyboard, and sometimes it's edited and done by half an hour, or sometimes it takes about half a day. But poetry is my inner anchor to all the stress that I face in the business world, in the research world, or in my interactions with various other forms. So it is therapeutic. My creative process is very emotional. It gets me centered in my emotions, as well as it anchors me and keeps me balanced with creative insights.
Thank you, Venilla. Give applause for Venilla. So you are very productive, yeah? Productive poet. Okay. Bejan, please.
Thank you. I'm a bilingual poet. I write in my second language, which is Turkish. My first mother tongue is Kurdish. I come from a Kurdish Alevi family. Alevi is a kind of belief system, goes back to Mesopotamia, Sumerian time. It's one of the oldest spiritual belief system. I come from such a culture, and of course I was forced to write in Turkish because I had education in Turkish. I didn't have chance to have the Kurdish education, and I was I studied law. I'm a lawyer, but I didn't practice. I'm a full-time writer now. The question that when the poetry was something that you cannot leave behind or leave. It's your life. My story starts with a very traumatic experience. In Ankara, I was studying law and I was in prison for one year.
Yeah.
Yes. And I was very heavily tortured. And in this dark cell in the police custody, very dark and cold cell, I stayed 38 days there. They locked me in a very dark cell. And there I was trying to feel that I am alive. And my shattered being is like, I was trying to pull myself and feel my soul that I'm still there. They didn't kill me yet. And I start, this now is easy to speak about this. It has been over 30 years. I was 19 years old that time. And that time in this dark, I started doing a kind of dance ritual. I was turning around myself and doing a kind of rhythm, as I described when I start to talk. And after a certain moment, I felt in the dark, the words are shining around me. I felt the words. And this was my very first strong connection with poetry. And for me, it's a matter of survival. And that's why poetry is my life, of course. Without poetry, I cannot. It was a great therapy. Without poetry, I didn't get any psychotherapy, but I heal myself through poetry, through writing. Writing is the way to express first myself, and then the culture I came from, the place I came from, because I come from one of the oldest ancient culture in Middle East, and we face many tragedies, problems, still we do. But the only way to be to give a voice to the silent one is to write for me. I am their voice. And once I was invited to South Bank Poetry Festival in London, and there I was giving the closing session with a poet. At the end of reading, many audience, they came and they thanks. They said, we didn't know how Turkish sounds that peaceful and nice. How beautiful the Turkish language. And they were thanking for that. But this gave me a kind of sorrow. You know, I felt sorrow. Because this Turkish that I create in my poetry, I soften the language. I broaden the language. The critics, they write that. They say that. And I felt sorrow because in this Turkish, there is my Kurdish in it. There is a layer of another language, another emotions, another history, another reality. There is an inner reality in my Turkish. That's why it has a kind of depth and layers. And after feeling these emotions and sorrow, I was off to New York, flying over Atlantic. For the first time, I started writing in my Kurdish mother tongue, 3 short poems I wrote. And then I called my mom. I said, Mom, do you know, because my mom is illiterate, she cannot understand my Turkish. She cannot read it. And I told her, I'm writing in Kurdish now, you know. And she was so like surprised and proud. She said, really? And she said, when you come, please read them for me. I want to listen and understand. And then I went back to my hometown. I met my mom, and then I read the poem that in Kurdish. And when she was listening in a very proud face, I felt that she didn't say much, but only one thing she said, She said, when you say, because one of the title was Chahpa, she said, when you say Chahpa, do you mean turn around you or come back to someone? You call someone to return. I said, I'm calling someone to return. And she said, then this is not Chahpa, it's Vegere. She become my illiterate mother, become my editor. And writing in mother tongue is like being complete. It's like having a root and have this great connection with your being. That's why now I'm writing my first Kurdish book, and it's almost complete. I will publish it by next year. This is my story with the words. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh my God. Okay. So touching. Thank you for sharing this. Okay, we will get back to that later, okay? Dr. Atra, you can share also about your creative process in writing poetry.
Sure.
Yes.
So I have a very, very analytical mind. My process is actually very mathematical and very scientific, which I think is kind of strange because there's always this discussion about like arts and science and can they go together and stuff. And there, I've never actually felt that that's like that's a big issue because the way that I write, is, it follows a process. So like I have a formula that I use, and like I count syllables, and I put my words on a grid to see how they. Actually, I put them on a grid to see how they're going to sound together, and then I look at how they're going to look on a page. So it's that's like the actual writing process, but the process of finding a poem and starting to write a poem, I procrastinate a lot. Like I was sitting here listening to Venilla and thinking, I wish I could write a poem a day. But yeah. I wish that I could. It's an extraordinary ability.
Thank you.
But I write about the things that I think are important to me, and I write the poems that I think the things that I think need to become poems. And when I started writing poetry, I started writing about all of the big issues and all of the things that I thought I wanted to change, and all of the things that I was going to change in the world. And as you grow older, you realize, well, okay, no, I can't change all of these things. But I feel like I started to realize that I needed to find out where I was. So this is the big issue, but where are you in this big issue? Where does this where does this fit in with you, and where do you see yourself within this? So I started to do a lot more reflective work. I write in multiple languages. I write in English, Arabic, and French. I've also noticed through the creative process that I feel in different languages, which I didn't know, but science and linguistics assures me it's an actual thing. But I feel joy and grief in Arabic, and for some reason the anger always comes out in French. I don't know why. And English is also in there. So I feel like I live. There's a wonderful poet. Her name is Christine Jean Blanc, and she says that she lives on a hyphen between two things. And I feel like as a poet, I live on a hyphen between all of these things. And I think in the beginning it was quite disheartening because I knew that I was a poet. I knew that I could become a poet, but I think that anything that's outside of the box, you'll have all the traditional poets, and you'll have all of the the old school poets and all of the who are great, but you'll have them look at you with like this kind of contention, and introducing them to new forms of poetry. There's a thing that I love, which is there is a poetry movement around I think it was around the 60s with Arabic poetry, and they started writing الشعر الحر, which is it means free poetry. It's been mistranslated as free verse poetry, but actually it means free poetry. It means poetry liberated from the constraints of rhyme and meter, and the things that we think of when we think of traditional poetry, or at least the things that I thought of when I was taught poetry. And it's essentially, I have that mindset of a poem is a poem because I intended it to be a poem, and because I wanted to make it a poem. It's not a poem because it rhymes, and it's not a poem because somebody else says so, and it's not, it's not a poem because of any of that. It's a poem because I made it a poem, and it's a poem because you are receiving it as a poem. And I think that's that was, I think, a big turning point in the creative process, because I wasn't thinking, oh, this needs to sound a certain way and this needs to be a certain way. I was thinking, this is a poem because I made it a poem.
Okay, give applause. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
We have a very rich perspective on poetry and rich feelings and emotions today. Yeah. Now I would like to give you a chance to ask questions to our wonderful speakers. I know that you have something in your brain and your heart and your mind about the story that has been shared by the three wonderful speakers. I invite 3 questions. If you want to have questions to speakers, raise hand and say your name. Yes, please. 1, 2, and 3. That first one.
Hello, thank you very much. My name is Janine. We've heard a couple of poems from Venilla, but I'd love to hear a poem from each of the other speakers, if that is possible.
Okay. Okay, thank you. We go on to the next. This lady, yes. Thank you.
Hi. What would be your advice for novice writers who are just trying to write poetries in order to process their emotions in a world where it's so fast and often we are discouraged for actually exploring the emotions? And also, not everybody grow up around poetry or have a community that encourage that literary expression. Thank you.
Thank you.
I would say 2 things to that. Sorry, are we doing all the questions and then answering, or are we answering?
Okay.
Sorry, I was confused about the process.
Okay, wait. Another question first. Yeah, we collect the questions and then we respond.
Okay. I thought it was okay.
Okay. The last one. Last one. Somebody raise hand at the back, I think. One more question. Oh yeah. This one. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Inga. I just wanted to ask how you first got published. Like,
Okay.
What was your journey with that?
Okay. So we are going to answer your question first about novice writers. How do they start writing poetry? Especially if they are not growing up in a poetry-rich environment or something like that. And Dr. Atra, you want to respond that? And then Nafila and Bejan.
I'm very happy that I actually remembered the question.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I would say 2 things to that. First, I would say read. Reading is incredibly important. I do not think you can be a writer without being a reader. So definitely read, and read some more. And the second thing I would say is, when you write, understand the value of your voice and understand the weight of your words. And my advice to you personally would be that everybody has a story, and nobody can tell that story but you. So I would say understand your voice and keep at it. The thing about writing is you have to keep at it.
Thank you. Next, Nafila.
My view is, I agree with what Afra says. I would only add that, which is already touched on it, I would say be authentic.
Yeah.
It needs a certain amount of guts to be authentic. And then I think poetry, as I said, is the simplest form, is the most genuine expression of what you feel. And sometimes, because of social conditioning or cultural conditioning, we tend to suppress our emotions and say, oh, do I feel this? Oh, but I shouldn't be feeling this. I should be in line with, my tradition. Whether it would be love or attraction or aspirations, there's always something else external trying to push us into a slot. But I think if you're authentic, then your inner words that you feel most, that you feel expresses your own emotions, comes out, and you put it on paper or you type it on keyboard, and then you see how it goes. And in terms of free words, of course, you don't need a meter. But in the way that I write, I'm heavily influenced by all the classicals. My first degree was English literature. I went to Oxford and wrote scholarship and read literature. So it's had its lasting effect. And I love Wordsworth and Keats and John Donne, metaphysics and all that sort of thing. So I still write on the metaphysics of love, on the philosophy of the self, and on that all of that sort. But poetry is not limited to any masters of poetry that we've been taught. Poetry is your own emotion in the flow. So get into that flow.
Yeah, okay. Last, Bejan.
I think making poetry, editing can be learned. It's something that you can learn. But hearing or writing a poem is something I believe you are born with this talent or you are gifted. I know in creative writing schools they teach how to write prose and novels. This is possible. But for poetry, we can learn only editing poetry, I think, not writing poetry. We can learn what is poetry, what is genuine poetry. Because poetry, as I said at the beginning, it's something that it's about our cosmic truth. It's about this mystery that we cannot see it in our daily routine, daily life, physical world. It's something beyond. That's why if you are gifted as a poet, this is a great chance. But you have to read, and you have to read the right poetry also. Because the things we call poetry is not always poetry to me. I'm very fussy. And if you have the sense of feeling what is good poetry, because it's about catharsis also. When you read it, and then it transforms you, it changes your chemistry. It took you somewhere else. This is my standard. When I choose a poem and telling it this is good or not,
Okay. Give applause. Wow. Wonderful. And one audience wants to hear your poem also. And Atra.
Okay. Ceremonial robes.
You want to stand up? Okay. Oh, yeah, it's okay.
I do this because this is my rhythm when I write.
Oh, yeah, okay.
That's why I prefer to sit and be anchored here. Ceremonial robes. In the cold decade heart of these lands, I saw eyes. Everyone was there with their voice and their body's pose. We know someone best while making love, when we corrode our hearts together. Growing heavy, our body wakes us in the night. Houses with courtyards are like graves. Childhood is asleep, long-lasting. And the yearning to touch, a yearning drags us towards death. I tasted myself in every body. I abandoned myself in every city. I took the skies of countries to my heart, and when I saw the emptiness of my heart, I said, it's time to go. Inside the moldering robes of ceremony, roots sway on the hanger. Even if we drop fire in the sea, it will burn forever. It burns a gift of desolation to the dark. Perhaps history is a mistake, says the poet. Mankind's a mistake, says God. Much later, in a future corrupt as the heart of these lands, mankind's a mistake, says God. I am here to correct it, but too late. The wave of red, lifeless water, the road followed at night, the poor earth strewn with travelers, the white swaying shrubs, ceremonial robes. The only thing needed for a race is the horse's mane. This is the truth. Now we are here, rotted away in a rut. God must not see the letters of my script. Mankind's a mistake, he keeps saying, and to correct his mistake, he gives sorrow, only sorrow.
Thank you. Okay, Dr. Azra, do you want to?
Sure.
Okay.
So I actually had a poem that I thought I was going to read, but I feel like sometimes the poem chooses itself and not the other way around. And I think largely because of the question, what advice do you give to other poets? I think I want to read this one. So this is a poem. It's a sestina, which is basically just a form of writing a poem that has a specific structure, and it has repeated words. So the words I used for this poem were good, poet, poetry, and what was the other? And home. And I love this one because it was an experimentation with form and departure from what I normally do. Yes. Oh, and for context, so this is about a time when somebody did not refer to me as a poet, but they referred to me as a poet. Yes, and I didn't realize until later that it was meant to be insulting. But they called me a poet. Anyways, so this is the poem. I stand when I do poetry, and I'm hoping that this doesn't fall out of my pocket.
Yeah.
So I'm good with the words, not so much with the tech. Okay, I think we're secured.
Yeah.
So I will ask that if you hear something you like, that you snap.
Yes.
Okay. Usually I do that and nobody snaps, so somebody snapped and that's great. But it just lets me know that I'm doing a good job and that you're enjoying the poem. So this is Sistina. Where will we keep all this bad poetry? How do we keep it from tainting all the good poetry? I often find myself wondering where good poets who write bad poetry go. Perhaps back to their poetry home, the first place they try to build words into a house, the first memory of a poem forming beneath stained glass ceilings in an empty house. Maybe they tried to salvage from the ashes and the ink of burnt manuscripts they called not worthy of poetry. The English literature major who declared they would not entertain your poetry on their bookshelves until I won an award. Now she sits across from me at dinner parties and tells her fellow poets how she always knew I was good, which makes me think that bad poetry is destined to live caged between quotation marks as a poet, to never wander into the midst of non-quotation marks, poets to stay just beyond the fences of perfectly curated bookshelves in poetry houses, and no need to find excuses to leave the places you never wanted to go. Instead, you find the street corners with the odd poetry, where they host poetry readings and no literature experience is required to be considered good. Have the time of your life and think, if you wished hard enough, maybe this could be home. Maybe this could be home. No one calls you with palpable disgust that spoken word poet who won a prize. That one who reads on stages for snaps, for crowds. There are no questioned credentials or literary interrogations in this house of poetry. Go. Go. As far as the stretch of image and imagination will take you, go, knowing that even if you write bad poems, you can always come back home, back to poetry. Bad poems can come from good poets' blood, brick and mortar to build this house of you on pillars of good and bad, bad and good. Imagine the best of the good. Imagine how many discarded words and poets never dared to poetry their houses into a home, thinking that a bad poet comes from writing bad poetry. Good. Good does not always mean finding a home. Go, for you are a poet. Lay poetry like foundation to the place that says to all poems, this is your house. Thank you.
Wow! Wow.
Wonderful.
Wonderful. Speechless. I don't know what
Thank
to
you so
say.
much.
Yeah.
Okay, actually, we have question also about how your work was firstly published. Okay, who wants to respond? To give response first? Venilla, maybe.
I mean, I'm unpublished, so it's not a question for me.
Oh, okay. Well, there are various ways of publishing. I think the first time I got published was in a small way, was in a student magazine at the university. And then I did a lot of performance poetry just to, and my audience was just friends and family. So I got confidence from them to see, you know, if it's impactful, if it's worth publishing, and that sort of thing. And then just approach poetry. But remember, the publishers in poetry, they are very unlike literary agents wanting a sample of the fiction work or a sample of the non-fiction work. In poetry, you have to give the whole collection. So, and I know that, you know, there's a division between chapbooks that are lower than 40 poems, and there's a difference between a larger collection. So it depends where you want to start. You may want to start with a chapbook, or if you already have a collection of poems, then you just submit that. And usually they are looking at what is interconnecting the pile of poems that you have. So there needs to be an overarching theme. And the way that I do is I select the best of, you know, the daily poems that I write, and see how it can be coherently connected into a book. For instance, this book, Resurging, has 3 chapters. You know, it's 101 poems with parts. The first part is quest, the second part is resurgence, and the third part is love, and it's called Resurging, just to give the overarching theme of a revival, of a resurging energy, resurging life with renewed purpose. So all of those poems, the 101 poems in this volume, are connected in some way to that main theme. So that is something that you should think about when you approach a publisher, because you could have, even if it's a chapbook or if it's not a chapbook, you need a theme that connects to you, and you need a number of poems that connect to the theme. So really it comes back to you and what's in your heart.
Can I just add, I know that I'm not published, and I don't really want to be giving people advice on how to get published. But the reason I'm not published is because I haven't found the right publisher yet. So I would say it's really, really, really important to find the right publisher for your work.
Yeah. Bejan, you want to add?
Thank you. After I was released from the prison, I was writing like a mad person for days, for nights, filling the notebooks. Maybe over 100 notebooks I had that time. For 2 years, I was living in Ankara in pain and writing. But after, I felt like these emotions that I'm spreading in my notebooks, this is not the poetry I'm looking for. I have to find a different poetry and get rid of this. And I changed my house, and I went to the city center. I rented a new flat, and there I had a garden. At the garden, I decided to burn all of them.
Oh my goodness. Oh.
Yeah. Now I'm regret a bit. But for a long time, for years, I was very proud of the things I did. I wish I still keep them somewhere. But it was filling my life, it was too much suffocating. That's why I wanted to get rid of them. And I had a kind of ceremony. I put on one of the aria by Maria Callas, Puccini, and crying and seeing my poems are burning. And it was a very passionate and very cruel action that I took. But then I'm very interested in archaeology, and I started to have my backpack and then go to the archaeological site all around Anatolia, myself, only me. I was walking and trying to hear a sound that I'm looking for. And after several visits in Hittite city, one of the Hittite city in Middle Anatolia, I wrote my first poem. The poetry I write now is that language. I got this language that time. And then I was writing and hiding from my friends, even from my boyfriend. He didn't know that I'm writing because I was so feeling like, how to say, kind of close and embarrassed. I don't know. I don't want to show anyone that I'm writing poetry. But then one of my friends from the faculty, she said, okay, I know you are doing something. Tell me. Don't hide. And then with a very strong feelings, I said, okay, these are my poems. I leave you. Read them. I'm going. I left her in my house and I locked the door and she was reading. I was outside, feeling like I'm going to die. My heart was like... And then I came and she was like that. She was shocked and she said, what have you done? This is a great poetry. You have to publish them. I said, no. And then, anyway, years passed. Still I was hiding my poems. There is a professor in Istanbul, a literature professor. I admire him a lot. He was working for a publishing house. And I wanted to visit him and share my poetry with him and have his thoughts. And then I found a way to reach him and I visited him. I was around 33, maybe 24, 24. And then I gave him my poetry file, it was ready. And he signed some of his books and he gave me some poems, poetry books that they published. And he was kind of sweet, nice, and kind of smiling. A young girl is bringing her poetry and asking if he can read. And then I said, okay, you can read anytime you want. I mean, I'm going. Again, I left. I left early. My tea was on the table, I said, okay, this is my poetry. He said, stop, write your number, please. And then I wrote my number. That time we didn't have email even. It was 1994. And then I thought he will call me 2 years later, 3 years later. He might have a very busy agenda. Next day, my phone rang and he said, Miss Bejan Matur? I said, yes. He said, I am Javad Chapan. I said, what? Yes? And he said, okay, come. Come back, we have to speak. And then he said, this is the poetry I was looking for years. We have to publish. My story starts like this. And then
Thank
it got
you.
to awards after that.
I think that story closes our session wonderfully. Okay, so thank you very much for your kind attention. Thank you, speakers, wonderful speakers, for all your stories that have been shared. Unfortunately, the time is out here, and I think we have a wonderful insight today in this session about poetry and how poetry can save our life and heal our feelings. And I believe that somehow we will find that poetry can be can be a medicine of this chaotic and toxic world. Thank you.
Just
Thank
an
Yeah?
announcement. If anyone wants to take a
Yeah.
look at the book and wants to have a copy, it's there in the
Yeah.
adjoining place, just to your right. And so you can have a look
Yeah.
at the different poems. You can either look at it or have a copy, whichever.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. See you.